Hi, my name is Carrie Walker, and I'll be facilitating the Village's Health presentation on living better with arthritis, coping skills to help you manage the changes. Please keep in mind that the information contained in this presentation is for educational purposes only and should not take the place of advice from your regular healthcare professional. By the end of today's presentation, I'm hoping that you'll have a better understanding of what arthritis is and the two most common types, symptoms and their impact, and lastly, changes that you can make to better cope with those symptoms and lessen the impact on your life. By the year 2040, the amount of people in the U.S. diagnosed with arthritis is expected to rise to 78 million. This increased rising of incidence of arthritis is directly correlated to the number of people aging in the U.S. These numbers don't include the number of people that haven't been diagnosed by doctors. Many people who suffer from joint pain and probably could have a diagnosis of arthritis don't get in to see the doctors, so are not included in these projected numbers. Also, these numbers are most likely conservative, unfortunately, because they don't factor in the growing trend in obesity. And since being overweight puts more pressure on the joints, it's likely that these numbers will increase even more over these projections. In order to understand what arthritis is, let's take a look at a healthy joint, this figure on the left. As you can see, on the end of each of these bones in the joint capsule, there's a blue lining. This lining or cushion is cartilage. Cartilage is a slippery, wet surface that allows the two bones to glide over each other in the joint. In osteoarthritis, this cartilage breaks down over time, and without this protective lining, the bones eventually will grind against each other. As you can see, it does cause some additional damage to the bones and bone loss. Not to mention, it's very painful. Rheumatoid arthritis is a condition in which the immune system actually begins to attack the lining in the joint capsule, causing inflammation. Although there are over 100 different types of arthritis, these are the two most common. Osteoarthritis is the most prevalent, and rheumatoid arthritis is the type of arthritis causing the most deformities. Depending on the type of arthritis you have, your signs and symptoms may vary, but often include pain, stiffness, muscle weakness, deformed joints, decreased range of motion, cracking and creaking, and possibly redness and swelling. Your joints may ache or the pain may feel sharp and burning. Getting up in the morning can be hard. Your joints may feel stiff and creaky for a short time until you get moving. The muscles around your joint may get weaker. This happens a lot with arthritis in the knee. Joints can start to look like they're the wrong shape, especially as arthritis progresses. As your arthritis gets worse, you may not be able to fully bend, flex, or extend your joints, or you may not be able to use them at all. Sometimes your joints make that crunching, creaking sound, and the redness and swelling that occur are due to inflammation. Symptoms may come and go. They may be mild or moderate or severe and get worse over time. Oftentimes, environmental factors such as temperature, barometric pressure, and humidity can increase the expression of symptoms. Obesity, diabetes, previous joint injuries, repetitive use and misalignment of bones in the joint, family history, gender, and age are all risk factors, making it more likely that you might receive a diagnosis of arthritis. Carrying excess pounds puts stress on joints, particularly your knees, hips, and spine. People with obesity have a higher risk of developing arthritis, and we'll take a look at why that is in a couple slides from now. Diabetes increases your blood sugar, and which also triggers can trigger inflammation in the joints. We'll take a look at a arthritis-friendly diet before we end the presentation that addresses this. People who have had an injured joint in the past, perhaps from playing a sport, are more likely to eventually develop arthritis in that joint. Jobs and professions such as competitive sports or regular physical activities or hobbies produce more wear and tear on the joints over time, resulting in the decline of the cartilage, as we saw in the previous slide. Some types of arthritis can run in families, so you are more likely to develop arthritis if your parents or siblings have had that disorder. Your genes can also make you more susceptible to environmental factors that can trigger arthritis. Women are more likely to develop rheumatoid arthritis than men, while men are more likely to develop gout, which is another form of arthritis we have not yet mentioned. And age is perhaps the highest risk factor for arthritis, but let's go into that a little bit more on the next slide. Aging does affect our musculoskeletal system. The amount of bone tissue that's made and lost in our life cycle starts to have a deficit. We don't have as much new bone tissue being made, which can make them less dense and more fragile over time. The composition of our cartilage changes. We have less water in it, making it less spongy or cushy in the joint. Our connective tissue also becomes less elastic and less flexible. However, the majority of these changes are due to disuse over time than aging, which is actually good news because that means that we can do something about the risk of arthritis increasing as we age by being more active. Before we go on to some of the things that we can do to help manage our symptoms, I wanted to take a pause here and ask you to reflect on these questions. Sometimes we downplay the effect of a chronic disease or condition on our life. We're survivors, we keep going. We may not be aware that the effect it's having on our life is starting to creep up and have more and more of an impact. Some of the things I would ask you, have you noticed that you're not walking the dog as much? Maybe you've started using the golf cart almost exclusively on the golf cart instead of walking part of the course. Have you noticed an increase in your weight and you haven't necessarily changed your eating habits? Have you started having an extra glass of wine or a cocktail to dull the pain after dinner or lunch? Have you noticed that you've stopped doing many of your favorite activities because it's just too painful, or maybe the stiffness is interfering with your ability to execute the movement of the activity? Arthritis is not easy to live with, but there's much you can do to change, overcome, or cope with the problems it presents, as we'll take a look at next. Maintaining a healthy weight is perhaps one of the best things you can do to lessen the impact of arthritis on your body. The added weight puts more pressure on your joints. For every pound of extra weight you carry, your knees absorb an extra 4 pounds of pressure. This means that if you're 20 pounds overweight, your knees are supporting a whopping 80 extra pounds of force with every step. It was thought before that fat tissue added weight to our bodies, but didn't do much else. Now, research is showing that fat tissue has a metabolic function. It produces proteins called cytokines. And what these do is they trigger inflammation throughout the body, particularly in the joints. Also in the joints, these cytokines can destroy tissue by altering the function of the cartilage cells. So when you gain weight, your body makes and releases more of these destructive proteins. Physical activity is the best available treatment for osteoarthritis and is one of the best ways to keep your joints healthy in the first place. Your goal should be 150 minutes per week, which breaks down to about 22 minutes per day. Definitely achievable. Exercise helps your joints stay limber, and it also strengthens your muscles that support and stabilize your hips and knees. Making sure to stretch regularly can help offset any loss and range of motion at the joints. When it comes to choosing exercises, use the SMART acronym. S is for start. Start low and go slow. Since you do have a chronic condition that causes increased pain in the joints, if you're just beginning an exercise program, it's important to start low and gradually build up so that you don't damage the joint. M is for modify. If you've been active and are frustrated because you're not able to do as much, or don't stop doing what you're doing altogether, but consider how you may modify that activity. A good example is if you've been an avid walker and it's become too painful, consider maybe modifying the activity and walking in the pool, which puts a lot less pressure on the knee joint. A is for activities. They should be joint friendly. A good example again is just, as I mentioned, walking in the pool. It puts a lot less pressure on the joints. R is for recognize safe places and ways to be active. If you have a limited range of motion or if your balance is being compromised, again, recognize where you can work out that's safe. T is for talk to a health care professional. Before making any modifications or starting a new exercise program, make sure to run it by your healthcare professional and see if what you have in mind is a good idea. It's important to respect pain. Pain is our body's way of telling us that something is wrong. One way to do that is to balance periods of rest and activity. Remember that both work and leisure activities are important, absolutely, but it's possible that you can overdo them. You may not be able to do as much as you once did, which doesn't mean that you need to abandon ship and not participate in the activities. It may just mean that you have to take shorter breaks, alternate between heavy and light activities during the day so that you're not putting too much pressure on joints at any one time. Pace yourself by learning to balance periods of rest with periods of work with periods of rest. Again, so that you don't put too much stress on your joint at any one time. You can also take longer or more frequent breaks when your disease flares up. Good body mechanics is another strategy to help manage the pain and stiffness in the joints. Body mechanics are the way that your body moves, and how you position your body in terms of like good posture can really affect the wear and tear at the joints. It's important to check your posture while sitting or standing. If you don't have your body in the proper alignment with your chin tucked back, the shoulders back, a stomach tucked in, there can be undue pressure, particularly if you're carrying extra weight on knee joints, hip joints, and also on the spine. When you're lying on your back or side, consider the use of pillows to support your body. You can use a cervical pillow underneath your neck to position it to avoid pain. They also have pillows that you can use while you laying on your side so that your arms and legs are positioned in a way so that when the bones come into your shoulder and hip joint, it's at a less painful angle. Distribute your load. When you're standing, make sure that your feet are spread an equal distance apart and that your weight is distributed equally on each one. Using body leverage means that using your larger muscles more so than your smaller ones. So what I mean by that is use your legs when you're lifting. I think we've all heard of that adage before. And if you're going to pick something up, use the palms of your hands rather than your fingers. Move or change your body position often to avoid stiffness, and also avoid locking your legs. Kind of shift or wiggle your joints around, your arms and legs around while you're seated or standing. The website listed here has a lot of great suggestions and will go more in depth about each of these areas. Controlling blood sugar will drastically reduce the amount of inflammation in your joints. Sugar binds to collagen molecules in the joints, causing it to become stiffer and more sensitive to joint movement, as well as the inflammation. An anti-inflammatory diet includes the following: oily fish, which is an example are salmon, mackerel, any of the fish containing high omega-3s. Omega-3 have been shown to reduce inflammation in the joint. Certain oils such as olive oil, avocado, or sunflower can also reduce inflammation. Dairy contains calcium and vitamin D, which are important for bone health. Dark leafy greens contain antioxidants, which can work against any of that inflammation that's caused in your joint. Remember, the inflammation is what causes pain. Broccoli has a component in it that has been shown to help also with inflammation and also to reduce the amount of decline in cartilage. Green tea contains something called phytochemicals, and this again is a powerful antioxidant fighting against that inflammation. Garlic and nuts also have an anti-inflammatory component. What you want to avoid are sugar, processed foods, red meat, and alcohol, primarily because they trigger inflammation, and any of that inflammation causes painful swelling in the joints. Now that we took a look at some of the things that you can do to help with the symptoms, I want to turn our attention to coping with arthritis. It's important to let people know what's happening. Oftentimes, if we're experiencing pain or we have a chronic condition, we change our habits and our behaviors, but we don't often let people know why. If someone's close to us and you've changed your habits, you're doing less things, you're not wanting to participate in activities that you've shared with them, that person could get hurt, lonely, not understand why you're doing what you're doing. So it's important to let them know what's going on because they can actually help you with it and stay connected to you. Let them know where you're at, and they may have ideas. For example, if you let your golf companions know that you're starting to suffer increasingly from arthritis, maybe it would trigger one of them to mention, you know what, why not, instead of playing 18 holes, let's just play 9. Or maybe say, hey, why don't we just pick you up? You can ride along with us and help us keep score. There's a lot of different creative adjustments that you can make to keep you active and doing the things that you like to do as long as you can. In the next couple slides, we're going to take a look at some creative adjustments you can make using assistive devices in your home and rearranging things. Organizing, there's a lot of different things we can do to organize and make daily activities easier. This is an example looking at this pantry. Organizing your work and storage areas, or I should say maybe, well, organize if you haven't organized them, or reorganize perhaps if necessary. You want to keep all the equipment and tools and things that you need within easy reach. If you're having a lot of pain, reaching or having to get onto step ladders is probably not the most comfortable thing to do. Consider using a lazy Susan or plastic bins to keep things close by. When it comes to our eyesight or something being on too tight on a jar, we reach for so many assistive devices that we don't even think about. Pliers are a good example here, bottle openers. We don't hesitate. So when arthritis puts the brakes on what you do, why not expand your tool chest to include a few more of the devices on the next slide to make it easier to do the things you enjoy? It'll allow you to keep your independence, and by continuing to stay active and to move, even with one of these devices, it's going to keep your existing muscle and musculature in shape and stronger for longer. Look at all these different things that are available. Some of them you might have been aware of, some of them not. I listed a bunch of them on the side and shown some of them here. For example, if arthritis makes it too painful for your hands to grip on jars, or you've lost strength in your hand and you can no longer open jars or spaghetti jars, things like that, consider this this gripper. You can also even put like there's a rubber pad that you could put on top of a jar to squeeze it and allow you to get traction to open it. And this doorknob turner, how amazing is that? If it's difficult to grip thin objects such as pens, toothbrushes, you can put a tennis ball around it. If you're finding it more difficult to bend over and pull up socks, put on shoes and things like that, consider using a long-handled shoe horn. The list is endless, and I would encourage you to take a visit to the Arthritis Association website, where there's a plethora of more. If it's difficult for you to bend down because you've got arthritis in your knees, you might consider using an elevated toilet seat. It's easier, it's less painful to bend down, and it's much easier to get up. Again, using all of these things will continue to actually help you stay more independent longer. When you're considering things, coping strategies, make sure that you consider that there's some emotional things that you could do or strategies to help with your emotional health. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help if you find yourself getting increasingly down and depressed and not wanting to do anything. Sometimes we need someone to walk us through some tools that will help us get unstuck. We do the best of our ability with the information that we have, but when we're faced with a situation that we've never gone through before, oftentimes we might need that help that a therapist can provide. There's different relaxation therapies that are helpful if you find yourself getting frustrated or anxious or overwhelmed because things are becoming more difficult for you to physically do. Some people have had good luck with acupuncture. The use of heat and cold, I think most of us are probably familiar with that. It's a good idea to grab a couple of these ice pads, or there's some of these pads or cushions that you can either heat up or make cold that are really handy to have around when you're finding a flare-up in symptoms. And also massage is really wonderful to help alleviate some of the stress, both emotionally and physically. These are some resources that I've kind of alluded to and where the majority of my presentation come from, and I would encourage you to visit them for even more insight. I hope that you have found the presentation helpful. At this point, if you have a smartphone, I'd encourage you to take a picture of this QR phone. And when you do that, it'll take you to an evaluation form. Your feedback is very important to us, so we encourage you to participate in this and give us the feedback as well as any suggestions for future. If you have any additional questions that I didn't answer during the presentation on arthritis, don't hesitate to reach out to our Learning Center. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.